You know, you probably got a V12 Vantage, and you probably bought one if you got lucky or had $500,000, but yours won't sound like this. How insane is that? Listen to it one more time. I mean, it's pretty crazy, right? This is no longer a factory Vantage V12. As a matter of fact, it's probably the only V12 Vantage that's actually been modded in the United States. It now sports a full Quicksilver Titan sports exhaust and downpipe kit, which is why it's pretty crazy sounding. And it not only actually sounds better, it drives better too. It's much smoother across all power ranges. So it is probably one of the best mods you could do to this car, except there's one more that outdoes that mod too, because this car is also now fitted with KW coilovers. And so we no longer have that ugly gap. And we've also added 18mm spacers front and back for a perfect fitment. So how do you take something so good as Aston Martin's latest masterpiece and make it even better? Well, you pay attention to the small details, and that's how we got this Vantage basically where it is. You know, I've had a lot of faults with the Vantage because I've always argued that for 400 grand, it was just too much money for this car. Like, it's still a Vantage. And while I know I showed you guys this spec and it was glorious and blah, 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 it's beautiful and all that stuff, that's not what we're talking about here, because that's a question of taste, and that's a question of putting a car together, which is fine. But we're talking about the essence of the car itself. Now, the big issues that I have with this car, after having driven it now over 500 miles, were basically that it was too floaty, it was too much of a GT despite being a sports car, and that while it had pretty decent sounding exhaust, it just didn't sound that exciting unless you were going really fast. And so I had to change those two things, and that's exactly what I did with the help of Quicksilver and Will's Boutique that got me this KW coilover setup. And it really came out good. Like, I can't stress enough how much this car needs this KW setup to be more planted. I think that's pretty impressive, and I think the car really does a good job becoming more of a sports car rather than a GT. It is not complete from a design standpoint. I mean, everything from the way the rear wheel sits with the spacers and the coils, it's just perfect. 18mm was what it needed on the front and the back. 15mm if you don't lower the car, because you're gonna get a little bit of a stick out if you don't camber it in a little bit. But I think it finally came out exactly as it should have from the factory, from Aston Martin, and I think it's beautiful. The car is still not without fault. Now that I've driven it 500 miles, I can tell you what some of these faults are, because I've now had enough time to basically drive this on the daily in the rain and everything else, and there are some parts that are incredibly annoying. I'll tell you the most annoying part of this car from a daily drivable standpoint, which is interesting, is when you actually get in and out, this piece right here will nail your nuts, and that's just terrible. You know, that's just terrible. And while you had to pay basically the nice price of a Rolex to have these seats added to your car, it does create incredible discomfort right here getting in and out, incredible discomfort. And on top of that, I may argue that this seat belt is incredibly annoying to use. Now, here's a couple of reasons why. First off, you have this little piece right here that holds your seat belt, which is fine, and then you plug it in. Well, here's what happens. Obviously, I'm a tiny person, right? So, well, depends what you mean by tiny. We're talking about my height. Just letting you know out there if you're a fan. Anyways, so this seat belt right here will kind of constantly rub right here, and there's no way to basically do anything other than if you like to basically drive even further down. But this doesn't really stop, and it's very annoying in basically the position of the way it sits. It's just annoying, that's all it is. The other thing that we should also note is that this car is basically fitted with an automatic. It's not fitted with a dual clutch transmission, and so the shifts definitely have a lot left to be desired. And we have talked about this 100 times, but it always helps to remind Aston Martin of what a piss poor job it did right here with this center piece here with the 500 buttons for no reason whatsoever. I mean, it literally, while you're driving, you would need a manual to figure out how to plug one thing to another. It's just unnecessary. It's just completely unnecessary. And this infotainment, completely worthless from Mercedes again. Outside of that, I would tell you, it's a pretty cool car. It's a very, very cool car. And while at first you may argue that it is a lot of money, just like I did, because 400 grand for a fucking Aston Martin Vantage is bullshit, it is truly better than a lot of other things you can buy for 400 grand. I would argue it's not a better performance car, but it's a better, funner car than my STO, which is also 400 grand. And if I had to compare the two, I would argue that this is equally, if not much more of a beautiful car, craftsmanship-wise, than a Huracan STO. So there is definitely a lot of value here if you're not looking for a hardcore race car to drive around, but you're looking for a very powerful sports car that's very fun to drive. And I mean, it is fun to drive. You saw it in my review. It's just it's a lot more fun as a convertible than it was as a coupe. And I think the design works better as a convertible. Even with the top up, I think it's very, very pretty. And usually I hate soft tops. I think soft tops kill the car. I mean, the cup holders are worthless, the center console's worthless, and the seats, while very comfortable, to give them credit, they're very comfortable once you're in them, are truly worthless getting in and out of. It is a lot of car for 400 grand, even though it does take an acquired taste to justify $400,000 for an Aston Martin Vantage. So I wanted to point that out on this car. Let's take it for a quick drive and get the real sound this car makes once you're actually in it. Because one final argument I will make about the V12 is that while it is a phenomenal engine and it's an incredible sounding beast, you heard it first, it is very hard to get an appropriate reading of the car when you're actually in the car, and to hear that noise, you don't get this same visceral experience as if you're driving behind it. I've driven behind my own car, and when someone gunned it, you would really hear it and get an incredible feeling and taste for how amazing the new exhaust is, and generally speaking, how beautiful it is. But when you're inside the car, because this exhaust is basically all the way at the bottom here, it just makes it very, very difficult to get a good hearing here on the car. So not a huge fan of that structure, because I really enjoy driving and I like the driving experience, and that's something that I was hoping this would do a little bit more of with the exhaust. And while I can't say that the exhaust is not loud enough, because it's definitely loud as you get used to it, I think it's a must-do addition to this car is to put at the very least a set of downpipes, and if not, then the full exhaust by Quicksilver is probably the best option here for this particular car. But again, I can't stress enough, if you enjoy cars as much as I do, lower your car, space it out. This very small mod will cost you under 2,500 bucks and is 1,000% worth it. Let's take it for a drive and see how much we like it. All right, guys, so we're about to hear how good this car sounds, but don't forget, before I forget, Black Friday in July is coming very fast for Exotic Car Hacks, and you need to click the link in the description to join our community. 20,000 plus people have pledged to get their exotic car, and within 90 days they've learned exactly how to do that, and you can too. Stop looking at videos on YouTube, start becoming an actual driver, not a spectator. And listen, your cars are gonna start sounding like this too, and that's the fun of the industry as a whole, is to mod cars and have fun with it. We're gonna hear this, but don't forget to click in there so that you can actually join us for Black Friday while I'm gonna hear this out. We're ready for this? Woo! Listen to that little popping. You really don't get as much of an exciting noise in the car as you do outside, but I guarantee you the noise is amazing on the outside. And this is kind of my only drawback to this car as a whole, because this is not a question of exhaust. This is a question of just how the car is set up. And it's really good, but here it is. It's loud, but it's not nearly as loud as what people are hearing outside. And this kind of reminds me of the SVJ in a way, because you get this incredible experience, but unless the top's down and then the windows open, the engine doesn't give you the same noise outside as it does inside. I mean, good or bad, I'll let you kind of guys decide if the Vantage V12 is really worth its hype. I think it's an incredible car all around, something that you don't see every day. And again, you hear it much more at lower revs, but even though it's a convertible, you would expect that pop to be much more glorious from inside the car with the top down. But nonetheless, very loud on the outside for everyone else to enjoy. Just sounds really, really good, drives really good now. Really glad we decided to keep this Vantage V12 in the collection. Again, I spec'd this car and I couldn't be happier with how the spec came out. And now finally, the noise, everything matches how exciting the car is. Guys, I'll catch you next time. Make sure you like, subscribe, turn on notifications. And again, don't forget to join us during this Black Friday in July. Click the link in the description and I'll see you next time in Exotic Car X. My name is Pejman Gadimi and I teach people how to drive exotics for free. Let's look here at how this Huracan can cost as little as $300 a month.